Innovation and Entrepreneurship by Peter F. Drucker. Introduction. Picture this. It's the mid-1950s. A man named Ray Kroc is selling milkshake machines, traveling from restaurant to restaurant. It's a decent living, but nothing extraordinary. On his travels, he keeps hearing about a tiny hamburger stand in California run by two brothers. What's strange is that they've ordered 8 of his machines. 8. That means they're making 40 milkshakes at once. Out of a single tiny restaurant. Curiosity gets the better of him. He drives out to this little place and what he sees just blows his mind. It's not the hamburgers, they're good, but nothing special. It's the system. The brothers had turned their kitchen into a kind of factory assembly line. Every step was standardized. Every movement was perfected. They were serving hundreds of customers with a speed and consistency that no one had ever seen before. Ray Kroc wasn't a genius inventor. He didn't invent the hamburger. He didn't even invent the idea of fast food. But he saw something that the brothers themselves didn't fully appreciate. He saw a revolutionary process. He bought them out and applied this system not just to one little stand, but to a nationwide, and eventually, a worldwide empire. Of course, that little hamburger stand was the first McDonald's. That story, right there, is the heart of what we're going to talk about today. It's the essence of one of the most important business books ever written, Innovation and Entrepreneurship by the legendary Peter F. Drucker. Now, the name Peter Drucker might sound like someone from a history book, but I want you to think of him as the wise grandfather of modern business. For over 60 years, he was the world's foremost thinker on management, leadership, and the way organizations work. He wasn't just an academic, he was a guide to the most powerful CEOs and even presidents. And this book, written in 1985, is arguably his most crucial work for our time. Why? Because it makes a bold, powerful promise. It promises that innovation and entrepreneurship are not magical acts of genius reserved for a few rare individuals like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. Drucker argues, with story after story, that they are a discipline. A systematic, purposeful, and learnable practice. By the end of our time together, you will have a map. A map that reveals the 7 hidden sources of opportunity that are all around you, right now, waiting to be discovered. You'll learn that being an entrepreneur isn't about being a reckless risk-taker. It's about being a disciplined, opportunity-focused realist. Whether you dream of starting your own company, changing an existing one from the inside, or even launching a nonprofit to solve a social problem, this book provides the fundamental principles. It's a toolkit for creating the future. So, let's begin. Book summary. To really understand the power of Drucker's ideas, we first have to clear away a few myths. When we hear the word entrepreneur, we usually picture someone starting a small, new business. Maybe opening a new coffee shop or a local clothing store. And while those people are certainly taking a risk, Drucker tells us that's not what entrepreneurship is truly about. He gives a simple, yet profound, definition that goes back almost 200 years to a French economist named J.B. Say. An entrepreneur, Drucker says, is someone who shifts economic resources out of an area of lower and into an area of higher productivity and greater yield. That might sound a little academic, so let's break it down. It means finding a way to get more value out of the same old stuff. It's not just about creating something new, it's about making what already exists better, more valuable, and more productive. The couple opening another Mexican restaurant in the suburbs is just doing what's been done before. They aren't really creating new value. But McDonald's was true entrepreneurship. They took the humble hamburger and applied management concepts, standardizing the product, designing the process, and training people to create a consistent experience for the customer. They created a new market and a new customer. This is a crucial idea. Entrepreneurship isn't about the size of the business. It can happen in a giant corporation like General Electric or 3M just as easily as in a startup. And it's not limited to business at all. Drucker points out that the creation of the modern university was a massive act of entrepreneurship. The same goes for the modern hospital. So, if entrepreneurship is about creating new value and higher yield, what is the tool entrepreneurs use to do it? The answer is innovation. And for Drucker, innovation isn't a flash of genius or a mysterious bright idea. He saw those as the riskiest and least successful sources of new opportunities. Instead, he believed that innovation is a discipline. It's organized, systematic, rational work. He said that successful entrepreneurs don't wait for the muse to strike. They go to work. They actively search for change, respond to it, and exploit it as an opportunity. And to help us do that, he gave us his map, the 7 sources of innovative opportunity. 4 of these sources are found inside a business or industry, and 3 are found outside in the wider world. He lists them in order of reliability, from the most certain to the least. And you might be surprised to learn that what we normally think of as innovation, a big scientific breakthrough, is actually the last and riskiest source on his list. Let's start with the most reliable, and often most overlooked, source of all. The first source is the unexpected. This comes in 3 flavors: the unexpected success, the unexpected failure, and the unexpected outside event. Let's talk about the unexpected success. This, Drucker says, is the richest, least risky, and least arduous opportunity for innovation. Yet, incredibly, it's the one that managers most often reject. He tells a fantastic story about the chairman of Macy's department store in New York back in the 1950s. The chairman was worried because appliance sales were growing so fast. Drucker, quite confused, asked why this was a problem. The chairman explained that for a fashion store like Macy's, fashion goods were supposed to make up 70% of sales. Appliances had grown so popular they were throwing off this normal ratio. So, what was Macy's doing? They were actively trying to push down appliance sales to restore the old balance. Think about how absurd that is. They had a winning product, with great profit margins and happy customers, but because it didn't fit their preconceived idea of who they were, they saw it as a problem to be solved, not an opportunity to be seized. For nearly 20 years, Macy's struggled and drifted. Meanwhile, another New York store, Bloomingdale's, saw the exact same trend. But instead of rejecting it, they ran with it. They realized that the boom in appliance sales was a symptom of a deeper change. A new type of customer was emerging, one more interested in lifestyle and the home than in traditional fashion status. Bloomingdale's built a new identity around its housewares department and became the smart New York store, while Macy's was left behind. Why do we do this? Why do we ignore unexpected success? Drucker gives a few reasons. One is simple arrogance. We believe we know what's supposed to happen, and when something else does, we dismiss it as an abnormality. Another is that our reporting systems are almost always designed to highlight problems. The first page of every monthly report shows where you failed to meet your goals, not where you exceeded them. So all the attention goes to fixing what's broken, and the unexpected success dies of neglect. The story of IBM shows the power of embracing unexpected success. Twice. In the early 1930s, during the Great Depression, IBM had spent all its money developing a bookkeeping machine for banks. But the banks weren't buying. The company was on the verge of collapse. One night, the founder, Thomas Watson, Sr., was at a dinner party and happened to sit next to the director of the New York Public Library. She asked him why his salesmen refused to demonstrate their machine to her. Watson couldn't imagine what a library would do with an accounting machine, but he went to see for himself the next morning. He walked out with a huge order that saved the company. He had stumbled upon a market he never knew existed. 15 years later, IBM built one of the first computers, designed purely for scientific calculations like charting the phases of the moon. But then, businesses started wanting to buy this scientific marvel for the most boring purpose imaginable: payroll. The leading computer company at the time, Univac, whose machine was actually better for business uses, looked down on this. They didn't want to demean their scientific miracle with such mundane work. IBM, however, though just as surprised, immediately responded. They embraced the unexpected market and, within a few years, became the leader of the computer industry, a position they held for decades. So the first lesson is this: when something works far better than you expected, don't just celebrate. Stop. Analyze it. Ask, what does this success tell us about the market? About the customer? What reality have we been blind to? The unexpected success isn't just an opportunity. Drucker says it demands innovation. Now, what about the flip side? The unexpected failure. Most of us try to forget our failures as quickly as possible. But Drucker says that a well-planned, carefully executed effort that fails is often a symptom of underlying change, and therefore, an opportunity. He tells a story from his first job as a teenager in the 1920s, working for a firm that exported hardware to British India. Their bestseller for years had been a cheap, flimsy padlock. But as incomes in India began to rise, sales of the padlock started to fall. The company did the obvious thing: they made a better padlock with a sturdier lock. The new, improved padlock was a total flop. The company went out of business a few years later. A small competitor, however, looked at this failure and saw an opportunity. They went out and listened to the customers. They discovered that what was once a single market had split into two. For the vast majority of poor villagers, the padlock was just a symbol. No one would dare open it, so the lock itself didn't matter. For them, the new, improved lock was a disaster because the key was easily lost. But for a new, small, and growing middle class in the cities, a real lock was needed for security, and the company's improved padlock still wasn't good enough. So the competitor did something brilliant. They offered two products. One was an even cheaper padlock with no real lock at all, just a simple trigger. The other was a high-quality, sturdy lock with 3 keys, sold at a much higher price. Both were instant successes, and the small competitor quickly became the market leader. The most famous example of an unexpected failure is the Ford Edsel in 1957. Most people think it was just a badly designed car, but in reality, it was one of the most carefully planned and researched products in history. Ford had designed it to fit perfectly into the upper middle income segment of the car market. When it failed miserably, instead of just blaming the irrational customer, the people at Ford did something remarkable. They decided that the failure meant their underlying assumptions about the market must be wrong. They went out and looked, and they discovered that the old way of dividing the market by income was being replaced by something new, something we now call lifestyle segmentation. This insight, born from a colossal failure, led directly to the creation of one of the most successful cars in American history, the Ford Thunderbird. The failure of the Edsel wasn't just a failure, it was a signal that reality had changed. The final type of unexpected event is the unexpected outside event. These are changes that aren't directly related to your business but shake up the world around you. The story of the personal computer is a great example. Until the mid-1970s, everyone at IBM was completely convinced that the future belonged to giant, centralized mainframe computers. Small, freestanding machines just made no sense to them. Then, a totally unexpected event occurred. 10-year-old kids started playing computer games. Suddenly, Their fathers wanted their own little computers for the office or the home. This development was a profound shock to IBM. It went against everything they knew and believed. But because it was such a shock, they took it seriously. They set up competing internal task forces to develop a personal computer, and the result was the IBM PC, which quickly came to dominate the market. The lesson from all three types of unexpected events is the same: don't dismiss them. Don't explain them away. Go out, look, listen, and ask, what has really changed to make this unexpected thing happen? This leads us to Drucker's second source of innovation: incongruities. An incongruity is a disconnect, a dissonance, between what is and what ought to be. It's a flaw in the logic of a situation that people inside the industry often take for granted. Drucker highlights a few different types. One is an incongruity between economic realities. This happens when an industry is growing, demand is rising, but profitability is stubbornly low. The classic example is the steel industry for most of the 20th century. The demand for steel was constantly growing, but the big, integrated steel mills were rarely profitable. The reason was a fundamental flaw in their process. To add even a little more capacity, they had to build a massive, incredibly expensive new plant, which would then operate under capacity for years until demand caught up. They were trapped. This incongruity created the opportunity for the mini-mall. The mini-mall wasn't a revolutionary technology. It used existing knowledge. But it was a different process. It started with scrap metal instead of iron ore, focused on just one end product, and could be built on a much smaller scale. This allowed them to add capacity in small, economical steps that matched the growth in demand. While the big steel companies were fighting to keep their old, inefficient plants alive, the mini-mills came in and took over large parts of the market. Another type of incongruity is between reality and the assumptions about it. This happens when an entire industry is working hard, but their efforts are misdirected because they're focused on the wrong part of the problem. Think about the shipping industry in the 1950s. Costs were soaring, ports were congested, and delivery times were getting longer and longer. The shipping companies were all focused on building faster, more fuel-efficient ships. They were obsessed with the economics of the ship while at sea. But they were missing the obvious. A ship, like any piece of expensive equipment, loses money when it's not working. And ships were spending most of their time sitting in port, waiting to be loaded and unloaded. The innovation that solved this wasn't a faster ship, it was the humble container. By separating the act of loading the cargo from loading the ship, the container drastically cut down port time. This simple, non-technical innovation quadrupled the productivity of a freighter and made the massive expansion of global trade possible. The industry had been focused on the 10% of the problem, the time at sea, while ignoring the 90%, the time in port. A third type of incongruity exists between the perceived values of the supplier and the actual values of the customer. Suppliers almost always think that what they value is what the customer values, but they're often wrong. Drucker tells the story of a highly successful securities firm that was started not on Wall Street, but in the Midwest. The big Wall Street firms all assume that their customers invest for one reason: to get rich. That's what motivates the brokers, so they figured it must be what motivates everyone. But this Midwestern firm recognized that there was a huge group of customers, successful professionals, small business owners, farmers, who had a completely different goal. They weren't trying to get rich, they were trying not to get poor. They were busy earning their money and didn't have the time or knowledge to manage it full-time. What they valued wasn't the chance at a huge windfall, it was peace of mind. So this firm built its entire business around selling not speculative stocks, but a range of investments designed to protect savings. It was a radical innovation that the big Wall Street houses couldn't even comprehend, and it made the Midwestern firm a giant. The third source of innovation is the process need. This is the classic necessity as the mother of invention. Unlike the first two sources, which start with an event or a contradiction, this one starts with a task to be done. It focuses on a weak or missing link in an existing process. Everyone knows the need is there, but no one has done anything about it. A perfect example is the development of the linotype machine in the 1880s. By that time, the demand for printed materials was exploding. We had high-speed printing presses and machines to make paper quickly. But typesetting was still being done by hand, one letter at a time, just as it had been in Gutenberg's day. It was the clear weak link in the process. The inventor, Ottmar Mergenthaler, defined exactly what was needed: a machine that could mechanically select, assemble, and then redistribute the letters. It took years of hard work, but it didn't require any brand new science. Once the linotype was introduced, it became the standard almost overnight. Sometimes, the process need is created by demographic shifts. Around 1909, a statistician at the Bell telephone system did a simple projection. He calculated how many telephone operators would be needed to handle the growing volume of calls. The result was startling. By 1925, every single American woman between 17 and 60 would have to work as a switchboard operator to meet the demand. The need for a different system was undeniable. 2 years later, Bell engineers had designed the first automatic switchboard. The key to a successful innovation based on process need is that the need must be understood. It's not enough to just feel that something is wrong. You have to be able to define the objective and the specifications for the solution clearly. The fourth source, and the last of the internal sources, is changes in industry and market structure. Industries and markets can seem stable for decades, and then, suddenly, they can change almost overnight. When this happens, Drucker says, it creates a massive opportunity for innovation. The automobile industry is the perfect case study. Around 1900, the car was a luxury toy for the very rich. All the existing companies were focused on this carriage trade, but the market was growing so fast that this structure was becoming obsolete. 4 different entrepreneurs responded to this change in 4 very different, but equally successful, ways. In England, Rolls-Royce decided to double down on luxury, creating a car that had the cachet of royalty and was deliberately built to be exclusive and expensive. In America, Henry Ford did the exact opposite. He designed the Model T, a car for the masses, mass-produced and affordable for the skilled worker. A third American, William Durant, saw the change as an opportunity to build a large, professionally managed company that would serve all segments of the new universal market. He founded General Motors. And in Italy, Giovanni Agnelli saw that the car would become a military necessity, and founded Fiat to build staff cars for armies. 4 different strategies, all responding to the same structural shift. But the companies that did nothing, that just kept on with business as usual, were the ones that disappeared. Drucker gives us a few clear indicators that an industry's structure is about to change. The most reliable is simply rapid growth. If an industry is growing much faster than the economy or the population, its old ways of doing business are almost certain to become obsolete. Another indicator is the convergence of technologies that were once separate. For example, when telephone technology and computer technology converged in the 1970s, it created the market for the modern office switchboard, the PBX. The Bell system, the established leader, saw these as 2 separate worlds. The opportunity was seized by newcomers like Rome, who understood that a new industry was being born. Those are the 4 sources of innovation found inside an industry. Now let's turn to the 3 sources found in the outside world, starting with the clearest and most predictable of all. The 5th source of innovation is demographics, or changes in the population. Of all the external changes, Drucker says, demographics are the most unambiguous and have the most predictable consequences. The people who will be in the American labor force in the year 2030 are already alive today. We know how many of them there are, what their educational level is, and where they live. These are not forecasts, they are facts. Demographics have a massive impact on what will be bought, by whom, and in what quantities. Teenagers buy lots of cheap, fashionable shoes. 10 years later, the same people buy very few shoes, but they buy for comfort and durability. People in their 60s are a prime market for travel. 10 years later, they are a prime market for healthcare and retirement communities. The strange thing is that even though these changes are so predictable, decision-makers consistently ignore them. They cling to the assumption that demographics don't change, or change too slowly to matter. This gives the entrepreneur who is willing to look at the facts a huge advantage. In the early 1960s, a small, undistinguished American shoe chain called Melville looked at the demographic reality of the baby boom. They realized that a massive wave of teenagers was about to hit the market. So they completely redesigned their business. They created new stores just for teenagers, changed their merchandise, and focused all their marketing on this new, dominant age group. As a result, Melville became one of the fastest growing and most profitable retailers in America. 10 years later, other retailers finally caught on, just as the center of demographic gravity was shifting again, away from teenagers and toward young adults. But by then, Melville was already shifting its focus to that new group as well. Another great example is how Citibank capitalized on the flood of educated, ambitious women entering the workforce in the 1970s. Most large companies saw this as a problem. Citibank saw it as an opportunity. They aggressively recruited these women, trained them, and gave them major responsibilities. These women, in large part, are who made Citibank America's first truly national bank. To use demographics as a source of innovation, you have to do more than just read the statistics. You have to go out, look, and listen. You have to ask, what do these changes mean for people's values, their needs, their wants? This brings us to the sixth source, changes in perception, mood, and meaning. This is the most subtle of the sources, but it can be incredibly powerful. As Drucker says, in mathematics, there's no difference between the glass is half full and the glass is half empty, but the meaning of those two statements is totally different. When a society's perception shifts from one to the other, it creates major innovative opportunities. Take the perception of health in America. All the factual evidence shows that Americans over the last few decades have become healthier than ever before. And yet, the nation is gripped by what Drucker calls collective hypochondria. There's a constant fear that everything causes cancer or some other terrible disease. The perception has shifted. We no longer see the great improvements in health, we see how far we still are from immortality. The glass is now seen as half empty. This change in perception has created huge markets. It created the opportunity for health food stores, for fitness magazines, for jogging equipment, and for businesses like Celestial Seasonings, which started with a young man picking herbs in the mountains and grew into a massive company. Another example is the change in how Americans perceive their social class. Around 1950, people in America, regardless of their income, began to describe themselves as middle class. An advertising executive named William Benton wondered what this change in perception meant. He went out and asked people, and he found that to them, middle class meant believing that their children could rise in the world through education. Benton saw his opportunity. He bought the Encyclopedia Britannica company and started selling it to parents of the first generation in their family to go to high school. The sales pitch was simple. If you want your child to succeed and be middle class, they need the Encyclopedia Britannica. He turned a dying company into a huge success by understanding and acting on a change in perception. The tricky thing about this source of innovation is timing. It's hard to know if a change in perception is a real, lasting shift or just a short-lived fad. Because of this, innovations based on perception have to start small and be very specific. And now we arrive at the final, seventh source of innovation: new knowledge. This is the superstar of entrepreneurship. It's what we usually think of when we hear the word innovation: a great scientific discovery, a technological breakthrough. And while knowledge-based innovations can be history-making, Drucker warns us that they are very different from all the others. They have the longest lead times, the highest casualty rates, and the greatest unpredictability. First, there's a long gap between the emergence of new knowledge and its application as a technology. And then there's another long gap before that technology becomes a successful product in the marketplace. All the knowledge needed to build the computer, for instance, was available by 1918. But the first operational computer didn't appear until 1946. And the computer industry as a whole didn't become profitable until the late 1970s, more than 30 years later. Knowledge-based innovations are also rarely based on a single discovery. They almost always result from the convergence of several different kinds of knowledge. The airplane, for example, required the convergence of two separate streams: the lightweight gasoline engine from the early automobile, and the mathematics of aerodynamics from experiments with gliders. Until all the necessary knowledge streams come together, the innovation is premature and will fail. But the most unique and dangerous characteristic of knowledge-based innovation is its rhythm. There's a long period where nothing seems to happen. Then, suddenly, there's an explosion of excitement and activity. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of new companies are started. This is the window period. Then, about 5 years later, comes the shakeout, a brutal period of collapse and consolidation that only a handful of companies survive. We saw this with the railroads in the 1830s, the electrical industry in the 1880s, the automobile industry in the early 1900s, and we're seeing it today with personal computers and biotechnology. And here's the crucial point: the companies that survive the shakeout are almost always the ones that were started during that early, explosive window period. After that, the door to the industry is essentially closed. This means that for the knowledge-based innovator, time is not on your side. You get one shot. You have to be right the first time. So we've explored Drucker's 7 sources of opportunity. But finding an opportunity is only the first step. You then need a strategy to bring that innovation to the marketplace. Drucker outlines 4 specific entrepreneurial strategies. The first, and most glamorous, he calls fustest with the mostest. This strategy, named after a famous Civil War general's formula for winning battles, aims at nothing less than leadership, if not outright dominance, of a new market or industry. It's the strategy of companies like DuPont with nylon, or Hoffmann-La Roche with vitamins. They saw a major opportunity and they threw everything they had at it, building huge plants, spending massively on marketing, and creating a new industry from scratch. This is the strategy we often think of as the only entrepreneurial strategy, but Drucker warns that it is by far the greatest gamble. It's like a moonshot. If you're off by even a tiny fraction, you miss completely. There's no room for error, no second chances. If it doesn't work right away, it's a total failure. Because of this immense risk, this strategy is only suitable for major, truly groundbreaking innovations. For most opportunities, it's simply too much. This leads to the second set of strategies, which Drucker groups under another general's advice: hit them where they ain't. These are strategies that avoid a direct, head-on confrontation with the established leaders. The first of these is creative imitation. This sounds like a contradiction, but it's a powerful strategy. The creative imitator doesn't invent the new product or service. He waits for someone else to do that. The original innovator creates the market and educates the customers. But often, the innovator makes a mistake. They are product-focused instead of customer-focused. They don't fully understand what their own success means. This is where the creative imitator comes in. They don't invent the product, they perfect and position it. They look at the new innovation from the customer's point of view and figure out what's missing. IBM is the master of this strategy. As we saw, they didn't invent the business computer. Univac did. But IBM understood what businesses needed: service, support, and manufacturing reliability, and they came in and set the standard. They did the same thing with the personal computer. Apple was the brilliant innovator who created the market. But IBM came in, offered the software and distribution channels that customers wanted, and took over the leadership position. Creative imitation is much less risky than being fustest with the mostest. By the time the imitator moves, the market is established and the demand is there. But it requires great discipline, flexibility, and a deep focus on the customer. The second hit them where they ain't strategy is entrepreneurial judo. In the sport of judo, you use your opponent's strength and weight against them. This is exactly what the entrepreneurial judo strategist does. They look for the bad habits of the established leaders, their arrogance, their focus on the high-profit cream of the market, their refusal to acknowledge a new technology, and use those habits to gain a foothold. The story of Sony and the transistor radio is a classic case. When the transistor was invented at Bell Labs, the big American electronics companies knew it would eventually replace the vacuum tube. But they were arrogant. They believed their big, complicated, expensive radios were quality, and they dismissed the transistor as low-grade. A small, unknown Japanese company, Sony, saw this arrogance as an opportunity. They bought a license for the transistor, and within a few years, they had used it to create a cheap, portable radio that took over the world market. They didn't compete with the American giants where they were strong. They hit them where they ain't, in the low-end, portable market that the leaders disdained. Drucker identifies several bad habits that make established leaders vulnerable to entrepreneurial judo. 1. The not invented here arrogance. 2. The tendency to cream a market, focusing only on the highest profit customers. 3. A mistaken belief in quality that is defined by the producer, not by what the customer values. 4. The delusion of the premium price, which just holds an umbrella over competitors. 5. Maximizing features to try to serve everyone with one product, which ends up satisfying no one. Whenever you see an industry leader with one of these bad habits, you're looking at a prime target for entrepreneurial judo. The third major strategy is to find and occupy an ecological niche. Unlike the first two strategies, this one doesn't aim for dominance of a whole industry. It aims for control of a small, specific, and protected market segment, a niche where you can be a practical monopoly. One version of this is the tollgate strategy. You create a product that is an essential, indispensable component of a larger process, but which makes up only a tiny fraction of the total cost. The company Alcon did this with the enzyme for cataract surgery. The enzyme was essential to making the operation smoother and safer. No surgeon would do without it. And because its cost was so small compared to the total cost of the surgery, no one cared what the price was. The total market was also too small to attract any competitors. Alcon had a perfect, protected monopoly. Another niche strategy is the specialty skill strategy. This is about becoming the sole, indispensable supplier of a unique skill at the very beginning of a new industry. Think about the companies that make the electrical systems for cars. like Bosch in Germany or Delco in the US. They started when the auto industry was just beginning, and they developed a skill, automotive electronics, that the car makers themselves didn't have and didn't want to learn. By the time the auto industry grew up, these companies had a controlling position that was almost impossible to challenge. The final, and perhaps most subtle set of strategies involves changing values and characteristics. Here, the innovation isn't a new product, the strategy itself is the innovation. One way to do this is by creating utility. You take an existing product and make it dramatically more useful. The English reformer Rowland Hill did this with the postal service in the 1830s. He didn't invent mail, but he invented the prepaid stamp. Before Hill, the recipient had to pay for the letter, and the cost was high and complex. By making postage cheap, uniform, and prepaid, he transformed the post from a luxury for the rich into a tool for everyone. He didn't change the physical service, he changed its utility. Another way is through pricing. King Gillette didn't invent the safety razor, but he was the first to realize that people don't buy a razor, they buy a shave. So he practically gave away the razor itself but designed it so that it could only use his patented, disposable blades, which he sold at a high profit margin. He priced what the customer values, not what the manufacturer makes. Xerox did the same thing when they decided not to sell their expensive copiers, but to lease them and charge per copy. This moved the purchase from a major capital expense to a simple office supply, payable out of petty cash. Finally, there's the strategy of delivering what is true value to the customer. A manufacturer of lubricants for heavy construction equipment realized that what their customers, the contractors, really valued wasn't lubricating oil. It was uptime. Every hour a bulldozer was down cost them a fortune. So the company stopped selling oil and started selling insurance. They offered a complete maintenance program that guaranteed a contractor's equipment wouldn't be shut down because of lubrication problems. They were selling what the customer was truly buying: trouble-free operation. All of these strategies, Drucker concludes, come down to one simple, profound idea. Entrepreneurship is always market-focused and market-driven. The test of an innovation is not its cleverness or its technical sophistication. The test is what it does for the user. Commentary. As we draw this journey to a close, I want to leave you with a few thoughts on why Peter Drucker's wisdom in innovation and entrepreneurship feels more urgent today than ever before. In a world that seems obsessed with the myth of the lone genius, the overnight success, and the lightning strike disruption, Drucker's message is a grounding and deeply empowering one. He reminds us that creating the future isn't about magic. It's about work. It's about discipline, observation, and a relentless focus on providing value to others. He pulls back the curtain and shows us that the engine of progress isn't some mysterious, unknowable force. It's a set of principles and practices that can be learned, practiced, and mastered by ordinary people who are willing to do extraordinary work. The most powerful lesson, for me, is the idea that opportunity is everywhere, hiding in plain sight. It's in the unexpected success your boss dismisses as a fluke. It's in the frustrating inefficiency of a process that everyone else just accepts. It's in the quiet shift in how people see the world, the moment the glass flips from half full to half empty. Drucker gives us a new set of eyes to see the world not as a fixed reality, but as a fluid landscape of possibilities. So, how can you start applying these ideas, right now, in your own life? Let me offer 3 simple practices. First, for the next week, start an opportunity journal. Carry a small notebook or use an app on your phone, and actively look for the 7 sources. Did your part-time job have a surprisingly busy day that no one expected? That's an unexpected success. Is there a task at school that takes way too much time for a simple result? That's a process need. Just by learning to see these things, you begin to train your mind to think like an entrepreneur. Second, pick any product or service you use every day, and ask Drucker's fundamental question: what does the customer really buy? When you buy a cup of coffee, are you just buying a beverage, or are you buying a morning ritual, a moment of quiet, or a place to meet a friend? When a company buys an accounting system, are they buying software, or are they buying order, control, and peace of mind? This simple shift in perspective, from what is sold to what is valued, is the starting point for so many powerful innovations. Finally, conduct what Drucker calls a systematic abandonment of your own life. Look at your habits, your commitments, the projects you're working on. Ask yourself, knowing what I know now, if I weren't already doing this, would I start? You will be amazed at how much of your time and energy is being consumed by yesterday. And freeing up those resources is the essential first step to having the capacity to build tomorrow. That was the book summary of Innovation and Entrepreneurship by Peter Drucker. We've journeyed through the core of his thinking today, but a summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. It can show you the landmarks, but it can never replace the feeling of actually walking the trails yourself. The real magic of this book is in the quiet moments, when one of Drucker's stories clicks into place and illuminates a part of your own world you'd never seen clearly before. This summary is your map, designed to help you decide if the journey is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has sparked a curiosity in you, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning, it's an experience that can fundamentally change the way you see opportunity in your own life and in the world around you. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that this work is making a difference, and it ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.